doesn't have legs.
Yeah. I just put it somewhere, Swamiji, and then it will rest. It's fine. And it's, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, careful. Can you move? Yeah. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And Paramahamsa Yogananda put the Buddha Stotram to melody. So I'll sing it in the Sanskrit and then he translated it into English. Brahmanandam Parama Sukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandvatitam Gagana Triguna Rahitam. I get those two mixed up. It's Gagana Satrisham Tattvamasyati Laksham Ekam Nityam Vimalam Asalam Sarvadi Sakshi Bhutam Bhavatitam Triguna Rahitam Sadguru Tam Namami, full of bliss, giving joy, transcendent of higher knowledge, the abode, dual no more, clear as the heavens, known to all as thou art vast. He is pure, permanent, unmoving, the everlasting, seer of all, far, far beyond qualities and thought. Guru Lord, I bow to thee. Guru Lord, I bow to thee. So what did you want to talk about?
So
Swamiji, we wanted to, I was very curious about your life in Rishikesh and vis-a-vis America. So, what was the ideal that motivated you to go to India? Why did you hanker after spirituality? Maybe if you can address that, so that we can also be inspired to also, we can
Well,
understand.
you don't want to be a sadhu. It's too late. Maybe in your fourth ashram you can be a sadhu. Well, I was studying architecture in college. That's when it started. And my classmate, who was like the class genius, we started studying philosophy. We're studying actually Gurdjieff. I don't know if anybody knows Gurdjieff. Okay, he's from Armenia. It's a modern form of Sufism, you can say. And I just realized that, what? Oh, you almost stepped on him.
Huh?
You almost stepped on him. Mr. Fly.
Mr. Fly, oh, I'm sorry.
And I just realized that there's lots of architects, there's lots of mathematicians and all of that, and there's a higher calling. So I left everything. Actually, I left with my friend, my classmate. We decided that buildings had some kind of negative consciousness, and we had to leave everything, not take any possessions, no money, nothing, and start wandering, begging our food and sleeping under trees. And we were going to wander in America and live like that. And we did it for a few months, and it became too much for him. And he went home, and I kind of continued. So that's how I started. I was just living outside and, begging food and sleeping wherever I could sleep. And eventually I went to the mountains of North Carolina, and I met my first spiritual teaching. He was German. His father had been a Nazi officer in the war, and he was horrified by this, so he became Baha'i. He felt that the Baha'i faith was the way. And he had studied Gurdjieff and all the Western traditions, mystical traditions, and I was with him for quite some years and was Baha'i. But like I told you, oh no, I didn't tell you. I told that Muslim on the airplane coming here. There was a Muslim guy sitting from Tehran, and we had long conversations on the airplane. I had a problem with the Baha'i faith because they teach that the soul is created at conception, but is eternal. And that you're born with a certain capacity, and you have to live up to that capacity. And I decided that meant that God was unjust. And because some people are born geniuses, some people are born handicapped, some people die at birth. So I felt that reincarnation was the only answer to that, And I left that, and eventually I found I continued basically living like I was telling you before. I went out west in America to Arizona and then to Southern California, living in parks and stuff, and I found myself at the doorstep of Yogananda's ashrams in California. Does everybody knows her mom's a Yogananda?
Yeah.
His picture was somewhere.
You have read the book. I have read the book.
All right. Who said that? You said that?
Yeah, I said that. The autobiography of Yogi.
Yes. Are more people coming, or?
Just the last one.
Okay, let's just wait. The last one.
The last one of the invitees.
What's his name?
Karthik Subramanian Sharma.
Oh, I see. You're from South India.
South India.
What part?
Both Kerala and Tamil Nadu.
Yeah, but Karthik is more Tamil
More
Nadu than
Tamil Nadu.
Kerala. Anyway.
Just behind your head there is this small ring.
What is it?
Yeah,
That
you,
thing?
yeah, you could hurt yourself.
Alright, thank you. So I joined, but I had started meditating on my own. I started following the prana in the spine and closing my ears to hear the sounds in the chakras. I didn't know what this was. And watching the breath, I just started doing it. So when I came to Yogananda's ashrams, I knew I had been a Kriya Yogi before. And I became a monk there. But I saw a photo of Swami Chidananda of Shivananda Ashram, the successor of Swami Shivananda, and I recognized him. And the head of the organization, Sri Dayamata, I don't know if anybody knows who Sri Dayamata, she was the successor of Yogananda. She felt I had been with Swami Chidananda in my previous life, and she sent me to India. And I joined Shivananda Ashram there. But I continued in Kriya Yoga, because I felt it was the best practice, and I didn't want mantra diksha. I wanted to continue in Kriya Yoga, and Swami Chidananda was fine with this. I served him as his secretary, and he told me that there was one advanced Kriya Yogi who I could go for guidance. That was Swami Gyanananda Giri. You don't know him. He was originally from Switzerland, and in 1952 he read the autobiography of a yogi, and he walked to India from Switzerland. And he never
walked to India.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And he never returned.
Mm.
He joined Yogananda's ashrams in America for 12 years, and then he retired to the Himalayas.
Mm.
So, and he passed away in 2015. So I used to go to him for guidance in Kriya Yoga. And he's the one that told me to give Kriya to others, give Kriya initiation to others. So that's, and then so eventually I didn't want to live in big institutions. I wanted to go into the forest. I started going to the forest to meditate more. And then Swami Chidananda told me, I built a little cottage, and Swami Chidananda told me I should live there. And eventually I got my ashram. But that was on the reserved forest land I was living. Eventually I had to leave that. And then some people helped me get a land above the Nilkant temple near to Rishikesh, next to the Rajaji Tiger Park. So that's where I live. I live alone in the forest. I have a couple guest rooms for my students when they come or whatever. But I like living alone, mostly. I like the animals more. I find animals less dangerous than humans.
Do you get visits from the tigers because you live close to the tiger reserve?
Yeah, the tigers are there. It's more leopards. Leopards are common. Tigers generally are little, about 1.5 to 2 kilometers Jilmilgufa. You don't know Jilmilgufa. It's where Gorakhnath did his tapasya, and there's like 10 Babas living in that cave. And the tigers are more there just because there's no road over there, you know. So we have a road near us, but they come. But leopards are common. And elephants come sometimes.
Leopards don't attack humans?
Yeah, we've never had a leopard attack or a tiger attack ever in our area. Bear attacks to women going for the grass in the forest. Once a year, usually some bear problem. No, they don't attack. They're not concerned. They don't. We're not on the menu.
That's important. That's important. We should end up on their menu.
We're not on the menu. No. And the cobra, they don't bother. Sometimes a cobra comes. I've had king cobra a couple times come. They don't bother me either. People are so afraid of snakes and stuff. No. I don't have problems with animals. I don't, but the problem is I don't go out at night. After 6 p.m. I don't go outside because that's their time, you know.
Yeah.
So, I told you in How long did it take to tell the life story? 10 minutes. So I practice Kriya Yoga. I avoid giving Diksha into mantra. I can. Come in. But mostly
You avoid giving diksha? What do you
in mantra, because I practice Kriya Yoga. I prefer to, and my students really love Kriya Yoga from Yogananda's lineage, you know. It's not the same as some of these others that are calling things Kriya, like Bihar School of Yoga. They don't have Kriya Yoga. Anyway, there are some, nowadays people are using that name quite often because Yogananda made it famous. But it's, you know, the Kriya Yoga that Yogananda gave, sometimes they may know something about the first Kriya because it's secret. It's not given unless you're initiated, you know. Some people, some of the traditions know a little bit about the first Kriya, but not the second, third. They know nothing of the higher Kriyas. Anyway. And Kriya Yoga was never in the scriptures written. But we give those practices like Hamsa and Anahata Shabda to get people ready for Kriya Yoga. That's Yogananda added those in 1935 when he was in Agra in Radha Swami, you know, because that's what they teach. And those are very good practices. Those you can give without initiation. And I teach I'm sorry, go ahead. I teach, nowadays I'm mostly teaching Yoga Vidya. Yoga Vidya is big in Germany, just because they organize it well. And I used to travel around more, but I don't really feel like traveling around a lot. Yeti Dharmananda is in that young stage, so they like to travel around and make all sorts of connections and stuff, you know. I like to be in India as much as possible. I'm sorry, what?
What does the Kriya Yoga lead to?
Lead to? Well, hopefully all sadhana leads to self-realization. No. But it's also important, the funny thing is we always talk, even in Kriya Yoga, they talk about, Lahiri Mahasaya said that Kriya Yoga plus devotion works like mathematics. It cannot fail. That's what Lahiri Mahasaya used to say. And all of the practices are supposed to work like that, you know, I mean, in the Indian tradition, you know. But if you have two different people, and they both practice the same practice, the same amount of time every day, one may progress faster than another. And they don't tell you why that is. I mean, some of it is the intention has to, so, you know, you have to have a strong clarity of intention in your practice. And also, if you've had the darshan of a saint, you've gotten some glimpse of what it is we're looking for. And I think that's very important when you do spiritual practice, to have some understanding of, to have had some kind of experience before that gives you a glimpse into that, you know. But also there's a problem of, and this is one of my new seminar I'm teaching, which I think is extremely important, which is not in the traditions, is shadow work. We have unconscious shadows that meditation doesn't always get rid of. You know what I mean by unconscious shadows?
Oh, I know.
Oh, okay. Well, there's different types of shadows in the unconscious mind that you're not aware of. Traditional religions fight against the instinctive emotions, you know, labeling these desires sins or mental defilements, kleshas, you know. But they don't, because they don't understand the evolutionary process, I'm talking about evolution, and that these instinctive emotions are what build the animal mind. They're scaffolding for the animal's mind to develop without the desires for self-preservation, which is the desire to exist, which is Buddhism calls the last mental defilement, the desire to exist as an individual, And in spirituality, we're trying to overcome this sense of individuality. And why is the sense of individuality so strong that it seems almost impossible to overcome that I'm an individual, and that's how the universe has worked, from the one to the many, and Shakti has put that energy there to make it a very strong thing. But that is also part of evolution, from singularity to greater and greater differentiation. Evolution works through taking a theme and expanding it into greater and greater differentiation. That's how the whole universe has functioned. So the desire to exist, or self-preservation, is one. The desire to reproduce is built into the universe. That's a very strong force. Swami Krishnananda of Shivananda Ashram used to say, the whole universe is working through you, that power, and you want to reverse it and turn it around. That takes superhuman, effort. That's why we have to practice sadhana every day. We have to. You're not going to turn the outgoing mind around that easily. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of reversing of the prana. Anyway, the instinctive emotions, because traditional religions, I'm talking about all the traditional religions, because all the traditional religions are born within a certain worldview that was at that time. That, we built these world religions when city-states were being built along major rivers. And they started developing agriculture because irrigation from the rivers, the agricultural revolution, and we needed caste systems to organize the civilization into various groups to do certain functions within it, It wasn't just India, it was all of them. Egypt was that way, Mesopotamia was that way, along the Yellow River, and China was that way, wherever it was, in South America when those developed, So if you understand that evolution has built, that we have that animal lower mind, which our higher mind cannot build on unless the lower mind is there, So it's actually important to us and our friend if it doesn't overpower us. So it's not evil. So especially Western traditions, and it came into India because of Islam and Christianity making these, before Islam came, we had Tantra was very big in India. And people didn't view sex in a negative way. It was a sacred energy, Islam and Christianity brought these sin kind of thinking, even in Hindus, and even in Buddhists. But that attitude towards those emotions and not understanding their value and trying to push them down, instead of channeling them in the proper way, creates big shadows in the unconscious mind that start working on your behavior, and you start being in conflict with them. You're trying to keep them down, and a lot of your pranic energy is put into keeping that in check. So you don't have all the energy, all that Shakti, that prana, is not there for you to use for higher purposes. In other words, it's, you spend so much time with them. And then we have, because family structures in India were much more healthy, much more loving, but especially as it's become westernized, then we start developing we have experiences in childhood growing up, traumas, and we don't understand, when we're children, we can't understand how to digest what's happening, and we internalize it in various ways. That creates shadows also. There's all sorts of shadows that we have for whatever reasons, and those things make it so we can't make as much progress in our spiritual practice. Spiritual practices that Indian gives are amazing, all of it, whether it's Vedanta or whether it's the Yoga Sutras or even Buddhism, But we need to work on that level too. Because a lot of our responsive behaviors when we're meeting people, all of a sudden it triggers certain things in us, and we start either judging or we're raga dvesha, attraction and repulsion starts automatically there. And a lot of it we're completely unaware of. And that is bondage. That is bondage. Whether it's repulsion or attraction, that is a form of bondage. Because we're not free anymore.
You mentioned self-realization.
What's that? Tell me again.
You mentioned self-realization.
Well,
Does
so
it come with
Kriya
any
Yoga,
particular experience?
she asked about how does Kriya Yoga, so the thing that, the real key that everybody knows who Lahiri Mahasaya is, right? Okay, some don't. Lahiri Mahasaya was a householder. He was basically from Varanasi, and he was stationed for a short time in Raniket in Kumon in Himalaya, and that's when Babaji came to him. Babaji had actually brought him there, had whispered in the mental ear of his superiors to send him there on a mission, And Babaji told him it's time to reintroduce higher practices like Kriya Yoga, because Babaji said we're not in the Kali Yuga anymore, we're in Dwapara, we're in the beginning of Dwapara Yuga. That's what he said. So, and when Krishna left the body, Krishna said that in the Kali Yuga, the masses cannot practice these higher practices. So the main practice in Kali Yuga is japa, is taking the name of God, That's the best practice for most people. And Babaji said we're coming out of Dwapara Yuga, it's time to reintroduce higher practices such as Kriya Yoga. And he gave these practices to Lahiri Mahasaya and said it's your mission to reintroduce this to the world. Kriya Yoga, according to Lahiri Mahasaya, since the breath, the heart, the mind are all the movement of mind is the movement of prana. Lahiri Mahasaya said that when prana is in agitation, that is mind. When prana is in resting state, that is the self. So the key to gaining control of the mind is to learn to gain control of the life energy, the prana. So Kriya Yoga is an advanced practice to bring the prana to bring more prana. He gives a specific pranayama technique that you won't find anywhere else. It's only in this lineage that I've ever seen it. And a lot of people saying they're teaching something like Kriya, they're teaching something that starts to touch on it, but it doesn't go that far because they don't have it. And what they're teaching is good, but it doesn't have the same power that pranayama technique. Like they may be teaching watching the breath or chanting at the chakras, whether beach mantras or Om or whatever, or Hamsa, or listening to the sounds from the chakras. These are all fantastic practices, But that practice, that pranayama that Babaji gave is what makes Kriya Yoga Kriya Yoga. Without that, it doesn't have that power. But that doesn't mean you can't realize God through other practices. Totally you can, So when you bring when you do a practice like Kriya Yoga and bring the mind to the resting state in the self, and do it enough, you learn to rest in your own true nature. You know, that's what self-realization is. And you feel that freedom that is your own nature, which is none other than Brahman. And so all of the practices are lead to that, hopefully. If you practice them well and gain some knowledge, you know, about the practice and understand the mechanics of it and where it's going, and practice devotion to God, that's very important also. Oh, thank you. Oh, it has 2 places for my fingers. That's a very nicely designed class. And of course, Vedanta works also if you do it in the traditional way, not in the, what we call neo-Vedanta, the modern way. The modern way won't, because traditionally the guru, you stayed with your guru for 12 years, the guru trained you, and then when he saw that you were ready, he would speak the Mahavakyas. You know, because he knew when you were ready to hear them, and that is ready to open up. But nowadays, everybody just learns them like they're, you know, it becomes common knowledge. Common knowledge becomes common. You know, it's not sacred anymore. We have to maintain the sacredness of these things. That's one thing that, you know, I mean, Luther, everybody knows Luther, right? He's famous in Germany. Luther is Martin Luther. That's one thing. The printing press enabled Martin Luther to translate the Bible into English.
Or German.
Huh?
Or German. I think he translated.
Yeah, first in German, I'm sorry. Yeah, later they did it into English. But to make it, that knowledge available to the common man. It's part of the Industrial Revolution and the modernist worldview that everyone should, there's equality, you know, and that has value, but, you know, and of course the Catholic Church had many corrupt practices like buying your way into heaven, paying that your sins are forgiven, you know.
God bond.
What?
The God bond.
Yes. But the Catholic Church also had saints, real saints, because they had higher understanding of the deeper teachings of Jesus. When you make it common knowledge and put it in a Bible that's for the common man, you have to take all that out because they can't understand it. That's why Jesus was crucified, because he did what he said you should not do, cast pearls before swine. I mean, it's a kind of a crude statement, but you know, Swami Bodhichitananda said that was why Jesus got crucified, because he did what he said not to do. He told the highest teachings, I and my Father are one, to people who could not understand it. So they killed him. You know. But that's, the Bible, a lot of that got taken out. So you have a religion for the masses and for the Industrial Revolution. You know, so you can go to work and on Sunday your sins are forgiven. Yeah. Well, they did gear it that way. It's for the common working man, you know. Anyway. And so Swami Shivananda did something similar in a way. He wanted to make the highest teachings available to the common man, to bring it into English, you know, and I love that. It's needed to be done, but you got to be careful, because then if it's too much like common knowledge, then the sacredness. Fortunately, I think Swami Shivananda did a brilliant job on it, you know. And he did not make the Mahavakyas and sacred things available in just like common books. Although Swami Shivananda did do mass initiations, and he was asked, Swamiji, why are you doing this? Most of these people won't practice this mantra, you know, if you give it. He said, I know that, but in that whole group, there will be some who will really practice it. He took a different view of it, that some will practice. That's his view of sannyas too. Swami Shivananda gave sannyas very liberally, and most people did not stay with it. He said, but if you taste it once, eventually you're going to come back to it. That was his view, and a few will stay with it. I'd like to say that sannyas is only for, see, I had a hard time with sannyas because I come to Shivananda ashram, and a lot of the guys who are now swamis, I grew up with them there, and they came because they were devotees, not because they had this burning desire to get rid of everything, you know, which was my definition of sannyas. You know, you either have it or you don't. You know? But they grew into sannyas in a gradual kind of path. So I value that also. So we were talking about self-realization.
Yeah, I was asking you,
Tell
does
me
it come
again.
with any particular experience? That was my question.
Experience. Well, according to Vedanta, self-realization is not an experience, because experience is dualistic. It has a subject and an object. So we can't speak of self-realization really in words. These are some of the certain things. Swami Chidananda once said there are certain things you can't talk about. And when you ask the question about it, an answer can't be given because it's beyond conception. It's like the nature of God. What is the nature of God? They give you some words, but it can't describe it. If they tell you Satchidananda, now do you know? Do you really know Satchidananda, what that means?
Satchitananda.
Yeah, have you, now by hearing that it's consciousness bliss absolute, do you experience consciousness bliss absolute?
We don't.
I know.
I think we can't.
It's a pointer, you know, but what did they say? What did the Buddha say? He said, don't look at the finger pointing to the moon, you know. The moon, the full moon in Buddhism represents enlightenment, and the Buddha's pointing to it. But people look at the finger, you know, which is religion. They look at what points to that. You can't know it without direct realization of it. That's the only way possible. That's why the Guru was so important. You know, someone who can convey some experience to you when you're ready. And eventually, it's up to you. The Guru can't set you free. He can help.
Yes.
People want the Guru to, you know, give them, a Guru can't give enlightenment. It's not possible.
But do we need a Guru in human form or can it also?
Well, that's a big question. And the thing is you don't have to have a Guru in human form, but it makes it easier, you know, because first of all, please forgive my language, but I'm going to use a language. A dead Guru doesn't kick ass. Do you understand what I'm saying? A dead Guru is not there to discipline you and to hold you to account. But if you, like St. Francis in Krishna, Jesus was not alive. St. Francis became a true sannyasi and fully realized because of that attunement was there. If the attunement is strong enough, you can do it with like Yogananda, you know. But it's better if you, like even in Yogananda's organization, he trains so many of them that in a way they are gurus because he trained them so well, but they don't want to say that because it's an organization in a modern age and they're trying to bring it in the West, you know. So they say, so Yogananda's the last one. But if you're in, that's why satsang's so important, you know, especially if you don't have a guru, a living guru, then satsang becomes very important. But it's best to meet sadhus who have had some kind of experience, you know. What?
Swamiji, the conversation is really brilliant, really wonderful, and we are loving it. But
Oh.
I am concerned that you have not had any
Oh, I'm
food-
fine,
any
because
food
you have to
since
remember, it's 6 hours difference.
You,
Well, let's see if there's any other question on that, or first.
yeah.
Can we go a little bit more? I'm fine. Water is good.
Swamiji, I have a question. So, you were telling that there's always a battle or the shadow that's happening, right? So, for example,
Not always, but generally, yes. If you're brought up in a traditional culture, like real traditional India, especially before Islam came, or like Tibet, or a place where these modernistic values and these kind of, where the family structure is not broken, you know, and you receive a lot of love, you probably won't have too many shadows.
well, in this case, at least
But-
we can say that, at least I can say for myself, there are some shadows out
Oh,
there. So
definitely.
this is kind of a daily battle or a struggle that
Yeah, I know.
will happen. So how do we tackle that? Or how do we?
Well, there's practices for that come from psychotherapy.
Well, do you think the yoga, the Kriya thing is?
No, well, like I said before, the practices that India has given, these powerful practices, if they're practiced really well, they can get rid of a lot of it. But it's hard to get rid of all of it. Partly, it depends on the person, but very few people can get rid of all of it doing that. Because we're so invested in our shadows, they give so much of our identity that we don't want to give them up. It's who we are. It's our persona. You know, that's what forms our persona, and we're not willing to give a lot of that up. So we spend a lot of time protecting it, even from ourselves, you know. From the part of us that would like freedom, there's other parts of us that protect that because it means so much to us on a personal level, you know. And you may not be aware of that, or you may be partially aware, because the unconscious, you have the deep unconscious, and you have some of the unconscious that bubbles up into the conscious sometimes, and you become. And what we want to do is bring that unconscious more and more into the conscious. The more you can bring them into the conscious, the more they're in the light, and they can't continue to exist in the shadows. So there's practices like what's called the 3-2-1, which comes from psychotherapy, where because most of our shadows we project onto others, either in the second person, like in a marriage, or if that's too close for us, we're projected onto society or onto other people and talk the he, she, it, you know, and that makes it more distant, so we don't have to deal with our shadow. They're to blame, you know, like group mentality, like the Republicans are to blame, the Democrats, the government's to blame, you know, not your wife, or not you, because first you might project it onto your wife or onto your family, and then if that's too much, you'll project it even further away. So their practice is to bring it from third person to second person back to first person, and realize that those things I'm projecting onto others are my own shadows, and once you start seeing it, gradually you take responsibility for it and start healing. But you know, there's practices that come from psychotherapy, or like Big Mind. It's another practice I teach where we start having dialogue with our unconscious personas, like the vulnerable child, or the protector, or, the controller. We can make kind of personas that actually are there. We solidify them so we can have a relationship. And once you start having, you can start having dialogue with any shadow in your unconscious mind if you start becoming a little bit aware of it, asking it, what is your purpose? Why are you there? What purpose do you serve? And if you start being aware of it, it can't do the dysfunctional kinds of things quite so much, because a lot of those things are there for a reason. They're trying to help you. But you're not understanding it, and then they become pathological. Do you understand? But those practices are generally not in traditional religions, because traditional religions focus on the vertical, transcendence. They're only and they don't want to deal with history. They don't want to deal with time. They want to deal only with that which is eternal. So everything in the time realm, in the relative realm, they kind of denote as non-existent in the absolute sense. But we live in the time realm too, and India does talk about the 4 ashrams, but they don't go into much detail on it. They don't understand psychological development. They don't understand how the subject and object got split. Vedanta talks about that. But a baby, when it's born, it doesn't have a subject-object split. There is no subject-object when in a newborn, and gradually that split starts happening. But that is actually a healthy thing. That's part of the process of growing through stage development. The traditional religions don't understand stage development. And that's very important. If you don't understand why we grow through certain stages, then you can't utilize them to the best benefit. Most religions start with us when we're an adult. And we already have pathology as an adult. So we're in suffering. They don't really understand. They understand that it's because the individuality is there. But they identify individuality in a negative sense. The ego is the enemy. The ego has to be gotten rid of. Actually, the ego does not, you can never get rid of the healthy ego. We're trying to get rid of the pathological ego. But gurus have a sense of individuality. Their individuality becomes more, in a healthy way. That Shakti starts expressing greater. Because the point is not to get rid of it. The point is to expand our sense of self to include more and more and more. All the way to Brahman. To realize there is nothing but that. Not to destroy something. You can't destroy the mind. Why do you want to destroy the mind? If you destroy the mind, you can't function in the world. And gurus have a mind. They think. They plan. They do all of it. Anyway. So the problem is those traditional religions don't have those tools. Traditional religions are born in a worldview that is focused on the vertical. That's why the government is vertical in traditional. That's why we have kings. Wherever you see kings, you see the traditional worldview, the city-states with feudalism, hierarchy. And then you get democracy in the modernism, and now we're coming to integral. Well, first we came to postmodern, which is the problem in the world today. The postmodern worldview creates a lot of problems, and now we're coming to integral, where for the first time we can start to see the evolution of the universe, how societies evolve through stages, how individuals evolve through stages, and that becomes part of the spiritual practice also, All of it starts coming together. The horizontal which is integration, and the vertical, which is realization. A lot of people have realizations, but they don't get rid of their shadows. They don't know how. So we have gurus who can go into samadhi, and then they go and get involved in money and sex and scandals, because they didn't have the knowledge of how to get rid of the shadows. That knowledge wasn't there. And in a way, it's sad because they didn't have it, but also it's not good to do those things, you know.
Can we reach samadhi without getting rid of the shadows?
Yes. You're asking, okay. Samadhis are states of consciousness. There are many states of consciousness. You know the main waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and then Turiya. That's the main ones that the Upanishads tell us. But samadhi is a state of consciousness also. States of consciousness are not permanent. You go in them, you come out. You don't stay in dream state forever. You don't stay in the deep sleep forever. You can't stay in the waking state forever, you know. The thing is that samadhi, and there's other states, like if you take shamanic substances, because shamans will give you plant substances to change your consciousness. That also gives you a different view. The thing that going into a different state can do is it takes you out of this state, at least temporarily, so you can see things in a new way that you never saw reality in before. So samadhi does that too, but samadhi can also burn out certain karmas, you know, because you're experiencing non-duality. If you go deep enough, it starts burning. If you go into, you know, nirvikalpa samadhi, it starts burning out a lot of your karmas. Sabakalpa samadhi doesn't do that so much, or what we call asampragyata samadhi. So anybody at any stage of growth can experience samadhi. That doesn't mean you're liberated. Liberation is when you can stabilize the experience to bring it into your waking state all the time. You understand what I mean? Okay. So if you experience, that's why we meditate. Go there and experience the nature of the self. Do it more and more until finally it starts becoming the way you live. Living from that. Not from ego. Not from from an expanded sense of individuality. I'll say that. You start to see the Brahman in all others. Because if you meditate enough and experience the self in yourself enough, you start realizing that that's what's in all others, and then you can really honor it, you know. You can't really honor it until you know it in yourself. All right, now can we take a break?
So Swamiji, we will have dinner now.
Please.
Yeah.
The prasad.
So, yeah.
It's a way of thinking about it.
Yes, we'll have to decide. So,
Did you offer it?
Did you offer it? You should offer it.
Yeah, please
Offer it.
offer it first. Are we going to stay here or what?
This is the place, Swamiji.
Okay.
Yeah. You can have it here in the place actually.
It's quite cold outside, no?
Yeah,
Is
it's
it?
There's
cold.
no way to sit out and eat.
Yeah, it's cold and also it's a bit dark now.
Well, it's a little stuffy in here because there's lots of breathing,
It's not very cold, maybe some of us can spare all in room.
or at least hold the door open a little bit.
Do you have any mosquito problem?
No mosquito.
Then you can open the door without bother.
You're okay. Okay.
All right. What's your name?
My name is Malika. Malika Khana.
No, I don't know that name. Malik, can you spell it?
M-A-L-A-T-H-I.
Put on the bed.
I don't know that. What's that mean?
Mala is a garden.
This one is left, this one.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So
Malati is one who has won a garland.
Oh, I see. Okay, nice. All right, what's your question?
You were talking about the shadows
Yeah,
that can lead to a lot of negativity in a person. Now, a spiritual seeker who's on the path
yeah,
often comes across people with all kinds of emotions and all
Yeah.
kinds of negative and positivities.
right,
There's also an exchange of energies that happen.
okay,
So when this person who's on the path, let's say moved from -10 to maybe -5,
uh-huh,
they meet a person who's very negative, it's going to pull them back to -10.
all right, why do you want to be with that person?
I wouldn't want to be with that person, but then this living in a society doesn't bring us, doesn't grant us that kind of choice. So we deal with so many people in our
Right,
everyday
right,
lives.
right.
So we still have to, like you mentioned, we also have to live in this time plane.
Right,
So how do we manage those energy exchanges, if I could say?
well, I think there's two kinds of ways. One is the more you know who you are, the less it affects you. You have a stability within your own self. And the other is, and we do that in that 3-to-1 process I talked about before, is coming to understand why they're behaving that way. Compassion. Compassion means, compassion comes from empathy, being able to enter into their awareness and see things from their side. What you know, they've suffered something in their life and they're living in pain. They're expressing pain, you know. So you have compassion, that brings compassion. That's why, I mean, you can't have compassion unless you have empathy to be able to see the God in them and see that it's in suffering, and maybe you may see why it's in suffering, or you may not. But the essential point is they're in suffering, and they're blind to their suffering, you know. So no one is doing it on purpose. It's a response from suffering. So those two things I think are very important, but you can also remove yourself from places. Sure. I mean, we need satsang. We don't need to be in the company sometimes it's very difficult because maybe you have a job or maybe you're in a family situation or whatever. But you can take certain precautions to, mitigate it, I think. Do you want to say anything more on it?
Well, I would definitely like to know if it's possible to kind of build an invisible shield.
Well, you have to practice sadhana every day with awareness, not mechanically. Doing japa doesn't mean you can think about everything else. The reason we do something like Kriya Yoga is that it brings the mind to stillness, so that if you pray to God or you do japa, it has power behind it because the mind is still and concentrated. If you do it japa without that stillness, it doesn't have nearly as much power, A lot of times you'll see people doing japa, and they're, that's not how we do it. But it's also, why is it affecting you?
It's about, I think it's because of the compassion and empathy that a human is endowed with. Some people practice it. I think I'm quite empathetic and
Good.
compassionate, and that kind of affects.
But you have to remember, if you react to them, that's your shadow coming up. And you need to be aware of that. Why are you affected by it? But you can also go to another place. And especially the least number of desires you have in this world, the more free you are to go to another place. Because we have jobs and all that, because we have certain desires. I mean, having a family is a desire, can't deny it. And some desires are because we need to grow through that. you know. But if we don't have desires, we don't need to grow through it.
Again, it's a catch-22.
In a way, if you have the desires, then you need to grow through them. Do they need help? Do you guys need help?
No, Swami.
Backup.
We're almost done.
Ask who?
She help for a